So, in my last video, I talked about being raised as a No Sabo Kid and how my parents wanted us to fit in and pursue the American dream. Some people thought I was angry at my parents, but I want to be clear. I don't resent them. I love them, and I know they did their best. What I'm really trying to unpack is how the framework of the American dream itself shapes immigrant families, and how that system wasn't built for everyone to succeed equally. And I use my personal lived experience to illustrate how these structures affect the decisions families make. I want as many people as possible to understand that in the eyes of the elites, the ones pulling the strings, whether you're man, woman, gay, straight, black, white, rich, middle class, or poor, to them, we're all the same. Just regular people they can profit off of or control. And before I continue, let's address something real quick. Sometimes, when I criticize the US government or its systems, someone will say, "Oh, so you traveled to Mexico and now you hate America." And that couldn't be further from the truth. The most patriotic thing you can do for your country is hold it accountable, to stop it from sliding into something darker. I wish I could say I'm proud to be an American, but the more I learn and the more I watch from the outside, the harder that gets. And let's go right over here to our Constitution, Amendment Numero Uno. Now, what does that say? Okay, that's what I thought it said. Freedom of speech. I'm literally guaranteed this right. I served in the United States Air Force for 6 years. I'm well aware of my privileges as a citizen of the US. So please don't tell me I can't question a system I signed up to defend. Patriotism is loving your country so much that you're willing to acknowledge when mistakes were made and strive for something better. Not questioning the systems, defending them when they're clearly not working, saying we're the best country on earth when you've never experienced another one outside of your resort stay in the Dominican Republic, that's nationalism, and you can't be both a patriot and a nationalist. Another thing that gets under my skin is when people act like the US is uniquely free because I'm traveling right now. You have the privilege of traveling, and here you are criticizing the country that gave you those very freedoms. Let's clear this up. Most people from developed countries can travel pretty freely. That's not an American exclusive. In fact, the irony is that if you're brown or from certain backgrounds, the US is one of the hardest places to enter or move through without fear, especially right now, with ICE, these unlawful detentions, random searches, and surveillance. That's the reality. So please, spare me the lectures. In poor countries, it's not like people don't have the right to travel. It's that most of them don't have the means. And let's be so for real. A lot of Americans don't have the means to travel either. I mean, I barely have the means. I was just brave enough, or maybe delusional enough, to go for it anyways and figure it out as I go. Now, I don't agree with RFK Jr. on a lot. And once he aligned with Trump, he lost my support completely. But there's something he said during his presidential campaign that stuck with me, and I think it's still worth repeating. He said, "When the king and queen look over the castle walls and see all of their subjects fighting each other, they go back to the banquet hall and pop their champagne corks." That image is exactly what's happening in the US right now. The more we fight amongst ourselves, Democrat versus Republican, left versus right, man versus woman, the more those in power can sit back, profit, and celebrate. This division is used as a strategy, and every time we fall for it, we make their job easier. At the end of the day, being a Democrat or Republican doesn't make you a good person. What matters is how you treat people, whether you advocate for basic human rights, whether you create a positive impact in your community, whether you show respect to everyone. And yes, that includes the things you say behind closed doors. If you're still cracking racist, sexist, or homophobic jokes in private, there's some serious self-reflection to be done. Integrity means consistency, not just when people are watching. So, with that being said, I know I'm coming in a little hot here. Let's put the politics aside for a moment, leave our egos at the door, and actually listen with open minds and hearts. This is Tales of a No Sabo Kid, Episodio 2.
Luca! Bueno? Pinyu! Bueno? Pinyu! Bueno?
So if you don't know, I'm a painter, and I'm currently working on my first ever gallery show, telling the stories of Latin America, the struggles and triumphs of its people, and the historical and political context of U.S. involvement in Latin America, as well as the mental and emotional toll that migration has on the people who sacrifice everything to make it to the U.S. in order to give their families a better life. Some people might say that the fact that I'm speaking on the injustices and problems within our system encourages Latinos and other underprivileged communities to have a victim mentality. So let me tell you why that's complete and utter BS. For clarity, victim mentality is the idea that someone sees themselves as powerless, blames everyone else for their situation, and refuses to take responsibility for their own life. And sure, we've all met people like that. Someone who can't keep a job because no one appreciates them, or who blames every breakup on their crazy exes. Those people exist, but they're the minority. Especially when we're talking about people who literally risk life and limb to migrate here, build a new life, and create opportunities for their families. Pointing out the inherent racism that is built into our system and advocating for that to be broken down doesn't make me or anyone else a victim. Pointing it out is literally just being honest. So let's break it down with an analogy. Let's say we're at soccer tryouts, and 10 of us are wearing pink, and 10 of us are wearing green. Coach says 8 people have to get cut today. Those of you who can't run 3 laps around the field in 5 minutes are gone. But before we start, Coach gives the green team extra work, carrying all the equipment down to the benches, while the pink team rides to the field in golf carts. We get to the starting line, and Coach says he doesn't like that the green team took too long with the equipment. So they have a lap penalty. They actually have to run 4 laps around the field instead of 3 in the same amount of time. So, Coach blows the whistle, and shocker, 9 out of the 10 on the pink team make it across the line in time, and 3 out of the 10 on the green team make it. One of the kids on the green team says, "But that's not fair. We were tired from carrying the water and all the equipment down, and it's almost impossible to run 4 laps in 5 minutes." And how do you think Coach responds? "Stop being a victim. These 3 did it. You should be more like them." This is how those of us who buy into these stories think, just like Coach. I admittedly believed this for a long time. But here's the problem with this. When the goalpost is moved to sheer excellence, it truly does become impossible for so many of us, and that's objectively not fair or just. I think most of us can agree that what Coach did there was wrong, but that's how our system works. The rules are different depending on where you start, and when people point it out, they're dismissed as having a victim mindset. But the truth is, when the bar is set at excellence only, success stops being about talent or hard work, and it becomes about survival against impossible odds. And don't get me wrong, I love stories of resilience. A couple of my favorite childhood movies, Coach Carter, Remember the Titans, Akilah and the Bee, Freedom Writers. These movies shape me, but resilience shouldn't have to be at the price of dignity. In a country that claims to be the land of the free, why do Black and Latino stories almost always start with someone clawing their way out the mud? Why is grit our baseline requirement for respect, while kids in the suburbs get success handed to them? Asking these questions and pointing out the unfairness of it all is not crying a sob story of victimhood. We're recognizing a system designed to favor some while exhausting others. And if we keep shrugging it off, then nothing's going to change. So growing up, I believe we were all out here trying to achieve the American dream. But what really is the American dream? And should it even be something we advertise to our people and the rest of the world? I mean, after all, is there a Canadian dream, a Swiss dream, a Danish dream, a Spanish dream? You guys get the point. What makes the U.S. so special that it has to have its own dream that everyone needs to aspire to? The American dream tells us that if you work hard enough, anything is possible. That's the story our parents and grandparents were sold. The story so many immigrants still believe when they cross the border. In America, you can build a better life. And on the surface, that dream sounds fair. It promises equal opportunity, not equal outcomes. The logic goes, you put in the effort, you'll get the reward. Simple, right? But the problem with that is opportunity isn't actually equal. The American dream ignores history. It assumes we all started at the same place with the same resources, and that success is just a matter of hustle. I think for many, going to college, attaining the corporate job, the house with the white picket fence, the picture-perfect family, is exactly what they want. Aside from the fact that this was a manufactured and propagandized image of what the American dream should look like, there's people like me who reject it entirely. And even if that's not the case, let's look at what the likelihood of actually attaining that dream is. Take generational wealth, for example. White families on average have 6 to 10 times more wealth than Black or Latino families. Let me put this into perspective a bit more. In 2022, the average wealth amongst white families was $1.36 million, and the average wealth amongst Latino and Black families was $227,544 and $211,596, respectively. That's an insanely huge gap. We went from 1 million and some change to in the 200,000s. And that's the average. So the number is skewed because most of our extremely wealthy are white and most of our extremely poor are people of color. So let's look at the median now. White families, $285,000. Latino families, around $61,000. Black families, little shy of $45,000. Still a very large gap. And that's not because white people worked harder. It's because for hundreds of years, black and brown people were either excluded from wealth building opportunities or their wealth was actively stolen. Enslaved labor built the economy. Redlining kept black and Latino families out of neighborhoods with funding and good schools, and deportation and wage theft have long targeted immigrant workers. So when a Latino family has to work 2 or 3 jobs just to survive, it's not because they're bad with money. It's because the game was rigged before they even stepped onto the field. And this is what gets people caught up. Why the American dream is so powerful is because sometimes it works. We all know the stories of people who made it. The movie actress, the CEO, the star athlete. And we cling to those stories as proof that the system is fair. But the truth is, those stories are exceptions, not the rule. They're the lottery winners of a rigged system. When someone wins the lottery, it's not like we say, see, anyone can be a millionaire. We understand that one person's jackpot doesn't erase the reality of everyone else's odds. Yet when one immigrant family rises out of poverty, people act like it proves everyone else just isn't trying hard enough. The American dream promises freedom through hard work, but in reality, too often it delivers exhaustion. For many, many immigrants and communities of color, the dream is like an endless treadmill rather than a ladder that they're climbing. You can run as hard as you want, but the ground's going to keep moving under you. And I'm not trying to say it's impossible, but it's important to talk about this because when we point this out, when we question whether the dream is real for everyone, when we examine what the real truth is rather than worrying about the optics of what criticizing our government looks like, we're able to admit that there's a gap between the promise and the reality, and we can start to close it a little. Let's go back to that soccer analogy for a second, but this time, let me show you what it looks like in real life. I'll use myself as an example. My parents were able to close the socioeconomic ladder an incredible amount, and I don't take that privilege lightly. And still, even with all their progress, my white counterparts were still levels ahead of me. My parents worked hard, but like so many first-gen families, they struggled financially while learning the ropes. That made it hard to put 3 kids through college. By 6th grade, I was already being told the military might be my best option to pay for school. So that's the route I took, and I don't regret my time in the Air Force. Those experiences helped me learn a lot of life lessons. But it's worth pointing out, this too is part of the system. For Latinos especially, we're told we have 2 main paths to upward mobility, school or the military. And being the overachiever that I am, I did both. I desperately wanted to work in the animation industry, so I enrolled in one of the most prestigious art schools in the country. I was lucky my parents supported that dream, because I know many immigrant kids are discouraged from pursuing the arts. In high school, I saw a lot of talented artists push towards more practical careers instead. That's when the disadvantage started to hit me. My school was overwhelmingly white. Even our foreign students were mostly from Europe. And while many of my classmates had their tuition paid in full, I was working, commuting 4 hours to my military base every month, then driving back with all my assignments due Monday. I was used to excelling, but here, no matter how hard I worked, I felt like I was falling behind. My grades were fine, A's, B's, an occasional C, but professors showered praise on classmates who weren't juggling half of what I was. 2 of my closest friends were people of color, with parents who could pay their way, but they were the minority. Most of us were grinding just to keep up. I'll never forget sitting at a lunch table surrounded by kids bragging about their parents' careers. Engineers, surgeons, lawyers. Meanwhile, I was the only one there with a job, the only one serving in the military, the only one $80,000 in debt, and the only one struggling with the worst grades. That was my reality, working twice as hard just to stay afloat while others played life on easy mode. And it didn't stop on campus. At school, I faced microaggressions and underestimation from liberal classmates who saw me as less capable, and sometimes less intelligent. Then, one weekend a month, I'd drive to base and face racism and sexism from older conservative men who objectified me, joked about me being Latina, or dismissed me outright. I felt it from both sides. I even had a staunchly liberal professor tell me that I would improve a lot if I quit my job and started going to more figure drawing classes. Like, gee, Jeff, that wasn't his name, by the way. I sure would love to do that, but wait, are you gonna pay my rent every month and make payments on my loans? At 19, 20 years old, that left me disillusioned and honestly, a little depressed. And this isn't a sob story. I'm just trying to illustrate what made me realize that the system isn't colorblind, and many people uphold its racist and sexist ideals, whether they do so knowingly or not. Up until this time period, I truly believed that merit was all you needed to make it, and to some degree, there's some truth to that. I managed to graduate college, complete my enlistment, and now I'm an entrepreneur who travels the world and paints murals, and I love my life. I'm still $80,000 in debt though, and I don't have a home, I have a school bus, but hey, I'm living the dream, baby. Not an American one, but one nonetheless. The very simple thing that I'm wanting for us all to recognize is that the game is stacked in favor of some and against others. And I'm saying it doesn't have to be that way. From the moment we enter school, we're indoctrinated with nationalist propaganda. Growing up in the US, I thought it was normal to pledge allegiance to the flag every morning. I assumed every country had some version of it, like a national anthem. But when my European friends told me how strange it felt to watch American kids stand, face the flag, and pledge their loyalty, I realized how unusual it really is. It reminded me of that scene in Avatar: The Last Airbender when Aang goes undercover in a Fire Nation school.
Good morning, class. Recite the Fire Nation oath.
My life I give to my country. With my hands I fight for Fire Lord and our forefathers. With my mind I seek ways to better my country. And with my feet
Firebenders, Fire Lord, blah, 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 blah.
And the crazy part is that the last European country to have anything like the Pledge of Allegiance was Nazi Germany. Today, there's only a handful of places that do any kind of Pledge of Allegiance, and one of them happens to be North Korea. That should make us stop and think a little bit. Maybe we'd be better off pledging allegiance to the Constitution and not a flag, and maybe kids don't need to drone on every morning of their school lives. I don't know. That's just me. Now let's talk about how nationalism and capitalism intersect here in America. We like to think that the system is fair, but it was designed to exclude. Take redlining. I never even heard of it until college because of course it's not something they teach us in public school. In the 1930s, the federal government literally drew color-coded maps, marking black and brown neighborhoods as risky for investment, which means no mortgages, no loans, no insurance. Meanwhile, white neighborhoods were deemed safe, and what was the result? Generations of racial segregation and wealth disparity. Even though redlining was outlawed in 1968, its effects are still everywhere. Many of those neighborhoods are still underfunded, still struggling, still lacking access to decent schools, community centers, small business loans, and fair wages. Families who started behind are still playing catch up, while others inherited wealth, property, and opportunity. And here come people in the comments. Well, that's not all minority groups. My mom and my uncle and me, not me. Well, guys, congratulations on making it despite the obstacles. But think about how hard you had to grind to get there. Is that really what you want for your kids? For anyone else's kids? This is capitalism by design. Most people spend the majority of their lives working jobs they don't even like just to survive. They're told, stick it out for 20 or 30 years, then you can retire and finally enjoy life. But on average, you only get another 10 years after retirement, if you're lucky. And now politicians want to raise the retirement age? Like, is this a sick joke? And politicians have the audacity to blame it on Social Security. Again, who do they go after? Our most vulnerable groups. I hope you guys are starting to see a pattern here. So let's be clear. Classism and racial hierarchy go hand in hand with capitalism, and that's how it's been since its inception. These aren't hiccups that happen because of the greed of man, corrupting an otherwise perfect system. It is this way by design, and we need to start truly prioritizing fairness for all, especially the working class, which includes the majority of us, by the way. From McDonald's employees to janitors to artists to doctors to lawyers, when we reject the system and demand something new in its place, in solidarity, that's when true change happens and we can live more peacefully with one another. So, something that has really been bothering me lately is seeing people post online,
why doesn't anyone want to Viva Mexico in Mexico? Or look at these people waving the flags of the countries they don't want to go back to.
And I'm not gonna lie, it literally makes me want to slap somebody. But we were never taught this in school, and I didn't know it either until I looked into it on my own time. Although I've always had a softer stance on immigration because I went to school with so many immigrant kids of various legal statuses and learned early on how hard it is to just come legally through an embassy. For a lot of families, there is no legal option. And I think we can reasonably say that if people are willing to risk their literal lives, it's because their home situation is desperate and not at all safe. But let me ask you the question no one ever does. Why is their home so unsafe in the first place? Is it just because they live in crappy countries and the US is the best on earth? Of course not. Why are so many people risking everything just to get to the so-called land of opportunity? The answer is uncomfortable, but it is undeniably the truth. The United States has directly intervened in the politics, economies, and way of life for so many in Latin America and the Caribbean. Here's a few examples. Guatemala, 1954. The CIA led Operation PB Success, overthrowing a democratically elected president, Jacobo Arbenz, after he tried to give land back to poor farmers. Why? Because it threatened the profits of US-based United Fruit Company, which also had some beef in Cuba, if you remember. The coup led to decades of civil war and violence that displaced thousands of Guatemalans. Chile, 1973. The US backed a coup against President Salvador Allende, replacing him with dictator Augusto Pinochet, whose regime tortured and killed thousands. El Salvador and Nicaragua, 1980s. Billions in U.S. military aid fueled civil wars that devastated these countries. Many of today's Salvadoran and Nicaraguan immigrants are fleeing the aftershocks of that violence. And good old Mexico, 1994, NAFTA. The North American Free Trade Agreement flooded Mexico with cheap U.S. corn, putting millions of Mexican farmers out of work. Many of them had no choice but to migrate north for survival. The Dominican Republic, 1965. The U.S. sent over 20,000 Marines to occupy the Dominican Republic after a civil war broke out, claiming it was to prevent communism. In reality, the intervention crushed a popular democratic movement and propped up leaders who would align with U.S. interests. The trauma of that intervention, combined with decades of economic policies favoring U.S. corporations, left deep scars, fueling instability and migration. Puerto Rico. For over a century, Puerto Rico has been treated as a colony. People are U.S. citizens but can't vote for a president and have no real representation in Congress. After Hurricane Maria in 2017, the federal government's delayed and inadequate response left thousands dead and the island's infrastructure in ruins. On top of that, U.S. tax and debt policies have pushed Puerto Rico into economic crisis, forcing thousands of Puerto Ricans to migrate to the mainland just to survive. And according to the Pew Research Center, there are actually more Puerto Ricans living in the United States than there are on their own island. Honestly, I could do a whole video series on the history of U.S. intervention in each and every one of these countries listed and more. I could go on. Honduras, Venezuela, Panama. It doesn't take a genius to recognize that U.S. intervention has almost always been about money and power, not democracy. So when our families migrate, it's often because of crises the U.S. had a direct hand in creating. And yet once we're here, we're told to be grateful, to assimilate, to pledge our loyalties to America the Beautiful. And some of us do. But some of us resist and hold our flags high. And why shouldn't we? Being proud of where you come from doesn't make you less American. It means you're refusing to let go of your roots, even in a country that tried to erase them. Latinos aren't going anywhere. We are a huge part of the United States, its workforce, its culture, its future. But instead of making it easier for those already here to become citizens, our government pours billions into ICE raids, private detention centers, and militarized borders. For perspective, in 2023 alone, ICE's budget was over $8 billion. This year in 2025, ICE has $28.7 billion at their disposal. Billion, not million. We can't even possibly fathom how much money that is. It's not even reasonably possible to spend $1 billion in a lifetime. Even if you were buying private jets, boats, multi-million-dollar homes, full-time staff, and giving away $1 million a year to charity, you would still be insanely wealthy. I need you guys to hear that part. Matter of fact, rewind a couple seconds and listen to me say it again. Imagine what would happen if even half of that went into real pathways to citizenship. Stronger schools, community programs, or places of community like parks and free recreational spaces. Everyone, immigrant and non-immigrant, would be better off. But that kind of investment doesn't make the elites richer. So instead, they double down on cruelty. I'm a second-generation immigrant. I was born in the US while my mom was born in the Dominican Republic. She moved here in 6th grade, not knowing any English, and was thrown into the deep end. Within a year, she learned English, and then moving forward had to navigate school and work and had to deal with people that often underestimated or dismissed her. I empathize with her struggle. Learning Spanish while traveling through Mexico has been challenging at times, but I haven't faced the same racism or belittling she endured. Maybe people laugh at my accent or don't understand me all the time, but my mom had it much harder. Judged, underestimated, and forced to prove her worth over and over. These are the invisible burdens that immigrants and minority groups often carry. If we look at it generationally, we have our first generation. Parents who immigrated, their goals, survival, assimilation, and creating opportunities for their children that they never had. Second generation, that's me. We have more privileges than our parents, but we still face our own struggles. Identity conflicts, language gaps, pressures to excel, and questions about our place in the system. Third generation. What happens here depends on us. It can be a reclamation of culture, a Spanish-speaking, proud child connected to their heritage, or further assimilation, where children grow up disconnected from their roots. When that happens, family stories are lost, cultures diluted, and lineage can feel forever changed. The first time I visited the Dominican Republic as an adult was in 2022 for my cousin's wedding. My whole mom's side of the family was there, and I felt the distance immediately. I couldn't fully connect with some relatives or the locals because I didn't speak Spanish. Watching my cousins bond with people on the island and so easily be able to embrace their culture was beautiful, and I tried to be a part of it, but I realized how much I was missing just from not knowing the language and not having grown up visiting the island every summer like they did. If I weren't actively trying to learn Spanish now and educating myself on Latin American history and cultures, that divide would only grow between my future children and their extended family. Our culture is the bridge that connects generations. When it's neglected, children often grow up unaware of their roots with a broken bridge that's very difficult to mend. So what happens when your culture dies? Your children's children may never know where their grandmother came from or the stories from that land. You lose history, understanding, and empathy. Even if you travel abroad, staying in English-speaking resorts and only interacting with other Americans means you miss the true essence of the place. You come back home, call it a vacation in Mexico, and remain disconnected. You're just an American, a foot soldier of the system. You live it, you breathe it, you uphold it. You're not Dominican, you're not Puerto Rican, just American. So, I was buying an agua fresca here in Mexico City the other day, practicing my Spanish with the vendor. He asked me de qué país, because obviously my accent sounds a little funny, but I told him estadounidense, and he looked confused and said that I looked Latina, so I explained what you guys already know, and he proudly tells me that his parents are from El Salvador, so he's El Salvadoreño Mexicano. And in the US, Latinos as a whole tend to get lumped in together, which is a beautiful thing to feel that kinship with people from so many different countries. And it was a really beautiful thing to experience that pride within myself and the pride that the agua fresca vendor had as well in his homeland, even though he's never had the opportunity to visit. Moments like that remind me why I make these videos. They're about uncovering the truths our families never got to tell us. If we want different futures, we have to honestly face what's been lost along the way. And for me, that means learning Spanish, connecting with communities, traveling, and sharing stories so we don't forget where we came from. For you, it might look different, but the first step is being willing to talk about it. And this is what I keep coming back to. No one should be forced to run extra laps alone. If we stand together in solidarity, we can keep the pace and build a force that can't be ignored. We can reclaim fairness, honor our cultures, and make sure the next generation isn't left running uphill while others cruise by. I know these truths are uncomfortable and are going to make a lot of people upset, but resistance is always this way. This is how it's always been. So, if this resonated with you, follow along. These are the tales of a No Sabo Kid. Thanks, guys. See you next time.